Bismillah ar-Rahman, I'm sorry. It seems my computer just completely cut out for some reason. So today I want to finish off some of the spiritual lessons from the surah itself. We stopped last week in discussing the three people that were on the journey. Now in the Quran, Allah mentions in this particular surah three people. One is Musa alayhi salam, the second is al-Khadir, and the third is Yusha bin Nun. Now I mentioned last week how Yusha bin Nun is essentially the disciple of Moses, of Musa alayhi salam, and that at the end of right from the offset, the intention is for two of them to travel. However, as soon as we meet Khadir, al-Khadir comes into the story, it seems that Yusha bin Nun disappears. And I mentioned some of the benefits to that, and that's where we stopped. And I want to start from there, inshallah. And I want to start actually from the exact point of where Khadir meets Musa alayhi salam and what he says to him. But before I begin that, I want to mention an important point that I've been wanting to mention. I'd want to mention last week, but I think it's apt here. And that is that is this story in the Quran, Musa alayhi salam and the story of Khadir, is it a real story in the sense that was it an actual journey that takes place between these two people? Or is it merely a vision of Moses? It's a dream or something of that kind. Now, the only reason that one would need to even entertain the idea that it's a vision is if there was a moral conundrum or ethical problem, and they felt that, oh, how do I justify when al-Khadir later in the story kills a young boy? Now, I think that's solvable, that problem anyway. But there's nothing in this story, as far as I'm aware, and as far as my reading goes, aside from the fact that none of the commentators have said so, none of the early Muslims have, as far as I'm aware, have believed this story to be other than an actual event that takes place. There's no indication in the surah anywhere where that it's a vision in any place or form. The surah seems to be clear that it's a journey between two people that's in the real world. So I just wanted to mention that very quickly. Just a point to everybody online. Can everybody hear me? I don't normally ask that at the beginning. Now, I want to begin with Musa alayhi salam's verse, or the statement that قال الله موسى هل أتبعك على أن تعلمني مما علمت رشدا. That, yeah, okay. Just a point to Hamza that I haven't got my phone on me, so just please put the questions on if we have any. That Musa alayhi salam says that, can I follow you? Ala an tu'allimani mimma ullimta rushda. Just before this, I want to mention quickly a backdrop before we get into the spiritual points that al-Qushayri mentions here. That this story is quite interesting because you have the first part of the story is to do with the journey and the miracle that takes place, the miracle of the fish. Now, again, I mentioned last time that I don't really want to delve into miracles right now, but the Quran is quite clear about this, at least this miraculous event taking place of the fish that he's told, he takes his fish with him in the basket and it finds its way into the sea, and then they retrace their steps. After Musa alayhi salam asks Yusha bin Nun, where's our lunch? And he says, look, this is what happened. You were asleep. I didn't want to wake you up. And so they retrace their steps. So Musa alayhi salam says, this was the sign that we were looking for. So the first point there is that Allah Jalla wa ala sends signs to his Anbiya, quite specific signs that they are in tune with kind of picking up. So they will know that certain things are clear signs from Allah. And there's certain hadith on this as well, of the Prophet in battles and things like that, where prophets are given specific signs and elucidations, and they know immediately that it's from God. However, we can't use that principle. Like if somebody said, okay, then I'm going to use that principle. Like I feel that there's a sign in this, and it's from God. It's very dangerous to do that. Incredibly dangerous to do that, because it may be your nafs talking, your hawa, and you may just want to interpret the particular event or story that you're involved in based on your own desires. So be careful of misunderstanding what that point means. The second point there is that I was mentioning before it cut off that Yusha bin Nun doesn't follow them on into this meeting. Now, Imam al-Kushairi was an early-ish, post 400 years after Hijri, a theologian and a kind of a saintly figure, in the sense that a spiritual figure. And in his commentary, and that's what I want to look at today, he mentions quite a few points of spiritual significance. Number one, he talks about the companionship between Yusha bin Nun and Musa alayhi salam, and I want to kind of talk about that. The idea of suhbah. Now, suhbah is a central principle in not only in Islam but in our spiritual tradition. Suhbah means good company. Imam al-Ghazali said there are four things that destroy the heart. The four things are: number one, he said, unrestrained glances, meaning looking at things that you probably shouldn't be looking out into, whatever they may be. He said that kind of darkens and destroys the heart over time. Number two, he said unnecessary talking, based on the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He who believes in God and the day of reckoning, let him say something good or stay quiet. Clearly, we put ourselves in a lot of situations of trouble when we speak too much. I read a message today, quite interesting, that only if it would cost 10p to post a message on the internet, like, you would be very careful on what you post. And I thought it's incredible. It was an incredible point that, imagine you had to pay 10p for every message you put on Instagram, every message you put on Facebook, every message you posted on Twitter, retweet, and all those things included. That would mean that you would be very, very considerate, and you pay a lot of attention to what you actually post on the internet, because there's a monetary value to it. It's costing you money. I think that would be a great introduction, and people would probably be happier using social media than on social media. So that's number two. Number three, he said, so unrestrained glances. Yeah, number three, he said overeating. So number one, unrestrained glances. Number two, too much talking, too much. And number three, overeating, which is clear in the books of spirituality, and hadith are very clear on that when we overeat, that affects our spiritual balance, affects it. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith I mentioned in one of the discourses, that the day of judgment will not come until many people are obese. So obesity is one of the signs of the day of judgment, actually. Not that obesity didn't exist before, don't get me wrong, but the proliferation, or probably the wrong word, but the kind of the amount of obesity that we're facing now, the numbers are quite clear. And I watched a documentary once on China and how many regions it didn't affect, but now, because McDonald's and all these takeaways are there, that obesity is going through the roof. Number four is the important one, the one related to this. He said bad company. That bad company, al-Ghazali says, will destroy the heart. And the Prophet ﷺ, there's a famous hadith that a person is on the path of his companion. I mean, the company that you keep will affect your spiritual equilibrium. Now, I do want to mention a point here which is quite important about suhbah. Unfortunately, there are a group of people that have monopolized the idea of suhbah. So you have particular groups, cults, of people that, and what they do is they claim that, oh, the suhbah is their suhbah, like it's like, but in fact, their claim to spirituality and their groups of so-called spiritual groups often are incredibly toxic and affect people negatively. What's meant by suhbah can be merely a good friend and staying away from bad people that make you do bad things or affect you in bad ways. Another caveat is the following: that when people become religious, when it comes to suhbah, they're like, okay, look, I've got a bunch of friends now, and what I'll do is I'm going to cut off all the people that I know because I'm so religious now. This is very, very dangerous and a very bad thing to do, and very judgmental as well. If you've got friends, everybody has friends that are struggling with their own spirituality. That doesn't mean you unfriend them. That doesn't mean you stop hanging around them because now you're praying or you've got some piety in you. It's like this new fad now where people read a book on mindfulness, whatever it may be, on love or what, and immediately they're so excited about the book, they go and deliver an online course about it. Well, hold your horses for a minute. First and foremost, try to practice what you've read. Put it into practice, take your time with it. When you're doing that particular thing for a year or two, for a while, and you've have a grounding in that, then by all means go out and benefit people. But at the first moment, it's a disease of this age that anything that we hear, we immediately put it out without any kind of introspection, or without kind of inculcating it, or without kind of practically applying that to our lives for more than 10 seconds. We're already, and then when we fall, we look really stupid, especially on social media, because we shouldn't have been saying those things in the first place. These things are very important. So therefore, suhbah is not about disconnecting from friends that you may feel you're more pious than. It's about reducing the amount of harm certain people are doing to you spiritually. That's the idea. And trying to fill that with slightly better company, or people that maybe, make you feel safe, people that make you feel good about yourself, people that don't bring a negative energy. That's what the idea of suhbah is. Of course, if you're hanging around with somebody that's doing haram and they're encouraging you to do it, that obviously should be, you have to remove that. Now, there's a really, really interesting point, and that's the al-Qushayri mentions, and that's the idea of the fact that Sayyidina Musa, he states, his words is mutahammal here, that Sayyidina Musa is carrying a what we may call in loose terms a burden here, where he, or I won't say a burden, but he's carrying a duty almost upon, he's taken a duty upon himself to find Khadir. So therefore, this mutahammal is a type of training, the indication, meaning Musa alayhi salam has undertaken a journey for a purpose. That purpose is to find this man and to learn some knowledge from him that God has mentioned to him, that this man has some knowledge that you don't. He's undertaken that journey, therefore there's some difficulty on the path. And this is the idea of, Imam Qushayri says, of ta'deeb, that of training, that any journey that you undertake will be difficult. It will definitely be difficult. And specifically the journey of al-ilm, knowledge, is a difficult one. Why? Because the nature of seeking knowledge, of trying to learn new things to benefit yourself, the nature of it is that it's full of difficulties and full of sacrifices. That's the word I was looking for. Now, here's an interesting point. In the Quran, when Musa alayhi salam and Yusha bin Nun travel, and he says that to his companion, let me bring the verse up. He says, لَقَدْ لَقِينَ مِنْ سَفَرِنَا هَذَا نَصَبًا. He says, look, bring us our lunch. We've, it's the journey has fatigued me, or fatigued us. Now, why is he fatigued? Number one. Number two, when Musa alayhi salam goes out to the mountain to speak for the Almighty, to address him, why is Musa alayhi salam, when that journey seemingly is longer, why is he not fatigued there? Al-Qushayri states that when we make a journey to God and God alone, then we're not, God does not fatigue us in that. But when we make a journey of knowledge, for instance, that naturally has fatigue. That journey has fatigue in it, although it's inevitably for God, but because it's not direct in that sense, it will cause us fatigue. Now, Al-Qushayri continues and talks about this idea of difficulty, ta'deeb, on the path of seeking knowledge, and just some take on that as some spiritual benefits. That the Messenger of God alayhi salatu wasalam said that he who takes the path of knowledge, God eases the path to Jannah for him. And other hadith about whoever the student, or the person who seeks knowledge, God, even the fish in the sea, they make dua for that. They pray for that person. Of course, there's not many fish left now, considering 85% of the sea is now the fish have depleted. So good luck with that. But the point is still clear, that it's a very difficult journey, and that's why most people actually, the journey of knowledge, they don't last very long on it. Take all the people that just even study Arabic, I mean, they drop out 2, 3, 4 months. It becomes very difficult for them, when the difficulty is the training, as Qushayri mentions. Now, I want to move on to the meeting between Musa alayhi salam and al-Khadir, and I want to mention some important points here. Where did he meet him? Now, there's a whole story related to this, and I don't really want to go over it today, of where this meeting takes place and all the differences of opinions about that. But let's read the verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, قَالَ لَهُ مُوسَى هَلْ أَتَّبِعُكَ عَلَىٰ أَن تُعَلِّمَنِي مِمَّا عُلِّمْتَ رُشْدًا. So we've covered the first spiritual principle, which is a principle of sohbah between Musa alayhi salam and Yusha bin Nun, of good company. Now we move on to another principle, which is about this verse. قَالَ لَهُ Musa alayhi salam says to him, هَلْ أَتَّبِعُكَ, can I follow you? عَلَىٰ أَن تُعَلِّمَنِي مِمَّا عُلِّمْتَ رُشْدًا, so you can teach me that which you have received from God, of guidance. There's several points now that I want to clarify here. Now, he mentions Musa alayhi salam. They said, I have come to you so that you may teach me something of knowledge of guidance. Al-Khadir replied, and this is a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the Torah not sufficient for you, and that revelation descends upon you? For I have knowledge that is not suitable for you, and your knowledge that is not and you have knowledge that is not suitable for me. So I want to break this down a little bit now about the types of knowledge and what is beneficial to study and what isn't beneficial to study. Another spiritual kind of lesson from this surah. What should you study in Islam or about Islam, or what's important for you? I remember I was in London once, and somebody approached me, this guy, and he said, so I just finished a lesson, and he said to me that, I want to enroll because I want to study. We have a long program, and that time it was 6-7 years. It's cut down now, and he said he wants to enroll onto a program. And I asked him why, and he said, because I want to be an alim. Now I just want to unpack that a little bit, and this is, I think, a very important point. These courses that are available, we ourselves in our own organization, the Sacred Text, for instance, that deliver this course, we've never ever called it an alim course, or we've never called it anything of the kind. It's always been the Sacred Text syllabus. There's a reason for that. When you say something is an alim course, the term is loaded. What do you mean by that? The word alim in Arabic means the knower, one who knows. And people assume that I'm going to do this course and I'm going to become a scholar at the end. Okay. First and foremost, there's no course out there that will make you a scholar. Not a single course, because scholars are not made by only courses, you see. Courses are there to give them their foundations, and then they continue to study and research for many, many years, decades on end. And then they are accepted as people who are knowledgeable, people of knowledge amongst the people of knowledge. By doing a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 year course does not make you a man of knowledge or a woman of knowledge or a scholar in any way or form, actually. In fact, most of the people who even study Dars al-Nizami, most of the people probably shouldn't have been in the class in the first place. They don't have the aptitude for this form of knowledge or any form of knowledge. In fact, if you look at Dars al-Nizami in the UK and have a look at the academic pedigree or just general levels of intelligence of people who enroll onto these courses, they shouldn't be there. And that's not to criticize people, but it would serve their time better if they were doing a different type of course. But because the Islamic syllabi, they demand a certain level of aptitude. So that's incredibly important, number one. But number two, and this is the most important, who has ever stated that people need to be scholars? I mean, a group from the community should be scholars, but scholarship is not something that people should endeavor to people should endeavor to become scholars or want to become scholars for the sake of being a scholar. Scholarship, number one, is a very difficult thing to achieve, but scholarship and piety are two different things, you see. You have many scholars who are what the Prophet called ulama as-su, who are evil, who are bad. Just because they know something doesn't mean that they're close to God. There's an assumption that the more I study, the more pious I will be. That doesn't make any sense, you see. In the Islamic syllabus, you study 6 or 7 texts in Islamic law. You study the chapter of prayer 4 or 5 times, probably. The more you study the chapter of prayer, it will not make your prayer better. It will tell you more about if this circumstance occurs, if your prayer is broken or not, but it won't make your prayer any better. So that assumption that the more I study, the more pious I will be, this is a complete misnomer. That doesn't happen at all, in fact. So the majority of people in history, even amongst the Sahaba, they were not all scholars. In fact, there were only a small number of companions that were scholars. And they never assumed, the other companions, that the more that I'll study, the more pious that I will be. That's not the case whatsoever. So that's the first point about the different syllabi that we have and different courses, and doing a 4 or 5, 6 year course, it's going to make me all of a sudden a very, very good Muslim. The next point is, then what should we study? And this brings us to this particular verse. Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam asks, and he's a prophet of God, asks, and from the mightiest as well, asks a very specific question. He says, "Hal atabi'uka ala an tu'allimani mimma ulimta rushda." See, he adds a caveat, you could say, the word rushd, so you can teach me rushd. Now, rushd in Arabic means guidance. The only thing he's concerned with is knowledge that he can utilize. Very, very important. Most people out there should only study things that have a kind of a value of function they can take and they can utilize. It's no benefit to most people for them to know nuances of Arabic grammar. It's not. Some scholars need to know that, yes. Even most scholars don't even need to know that. Most scholars do not need to be experts in grammar, and they never are anyway. Most scholars, they've studied grammar, but only select few will be real experts in grammar. There's a limit that normal scholars study up to, and then they'll leave it to experts after that. Now, or it may sound very makes good for a kind of party trick, or sounds very good with your friends if you know the nuance of this particular verse has this grammatical inference. But what does that matter to you? I mean, that doesn't make any difference to your life. It doesn't change anything. So most people, they should be worried about what knowledge they require for the akhirah. And in fact, that's scholars as well at the base level. All people, in fact. And that is what they call ilm al-hal, knowledge that relates to your state and relationship with God. Now, do I believe that Arabic language is part of that? I do believe that it has some part to play in that. And I do believe the Arabic language, everybody should try to learn at least a certain amount of Arabic, enough to understand their prayer and to possibly be able to navigate parts of the Quran. Maybe with the aid of a dictionary, etc., because it will give them another dimension to the Book of Allah. And that's not too difficult to do, but beyond that, their fard ain is enough, and that they stay in circles of knowledge and attend and things like that is more than sufficient. Based on this verse, for instance, because the Prophet ﷺ said, "A'udhu billahi min ilmin la yanfa." I seek refuge from knowledge that does not benefit me. And the knowledge of the Islamic sciences can be dangerous for some people. You may have a person who doesn't have aptitude, he's not very intelligent, he doesn't understand how to analyze and synthesize information, and begins to cherry pick quotes and misunderstand the religion of Islam. And unfortunately, certificates they handed out now like sweets. So he'll just say, "I've got a certificate." And proof of this is, case in point is, go on the internet and bring up most YouTube influencers that are du'at. You can clearly tell they don't have a clue what they're talking about most of the time. The amount of mistakes that they make is absolutely beyond belief. And then look at their history. They don't have proper training. They didn't give. They're very young. They're constantly changing their opinions, etc. I want to mention something here. A few points. Number one, there's a clear sign in the verse that you should not leave the pursuit of knowledge, even if you feel that you have reached its end. And that's a point I mentioned about what knowledge are we talking about here, though. Okay. To have humility in front of those more knowledgeable than yourself. Although Musa alayhi salam clearly is more knowledgeable than Khadir. Generally, he's more knowledgeable than him. But Khadir says, I have knowledge according to the hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, that's narrated by Imam al-Bukhari. He states, you have knowledge and I have knowledge, but my knowledge is not suitable for you. And we'll see later what that means. But generally, the idea of humility is important. We've lost that because in universities, I try to inculcate it in my own son that, when we're at secondary school, sometimes, you criticize your teachers. My teacher's like this, my teacher's like that. But generally, knowledge has been given a particular value in our tradition, regardless of who you receive it from, that we still respect it, because teachers have a role to play and they have a level of respect that's demanded for teachers, and students should respect that. And unfortunately, one of the great problems of this era in its sacred, in our traditional studies, unfortunately, and Allah protect us from this, is that people are coming out now and they are speaking against their teachers en masse often, where they've benefited from a teacher for many years, and then they will come out and then they will begin to badmouth that teacher and say bad things about that teacher. That of no benefit except nafs. It's a kind of a challenge almost. Their teachers, and they're the worst type of students who don't appreciate their teachers. If you have a difference of opinion with your teacher, it's fine. I've had several teachers, and sometimes I don't always agree with what my teacher's position is on a particular issue, but that's fine. It doesn't mean I have to air it and talk about it publicly, especially considering that the level of scholarship that they hold and the time that they've given to me. I should be respectful of that. So humility is incredibly important. Often you'll see, if you've studied in the private circles of knowledge, there will be students that will be very rude, incredibly rude to their teachers, and will show no respect to their teachers, no basic adab of even how to talk to them, of things of that nature. And that those students have never benefited. In fact, never ever have they benefited from their teachers. Number three, Musa alayhi salam's high station did not prevent him from seeking further knowledge, such that he traveled by sea in search for it. That even though Musa alayhi salam is very high in status, it did not prevent him from wanting to learn more, especially something that he possibly didn't know. Now, here what's important is, for us, the lesson that we take is could be age, or it could be assumed position as well. These two things. Number one, doesn't matter how old you are, you can still take benefit even from people younger than you. But assumed position is quite interesting. What you tend to have in the circles of knowledge is somebody may have studied 5 or 6 years, 7, 8, 10. There may be a contemporary of theirs, exactly the same age, maybe a younger, that's incredibly, or is an expert in a particular field. They won't take knowledge from them by mere virtue of the fact that they're the same age, or they kind of studied in the same circles from them. And this is arrogance. You should take knowledge from where you find it, or where you can receive it, if somebody's more knowledgeable than you. But however, be careful of taking knowledge from people who use it against you, and that's important. Qatada said that if anyone deserved to be content with his knowledge, it would have been the Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Now, Fakhruddin Razi derives several things from this verse as well. Number one of the adab, he said, he didn't say, "Can you teach me?" He didn't say that. He didn't say, "Can I sit with you and you give a dars?" He said, "May I follow you?" And this is interesting. See, ittiba. Ittiba is an important word. It's in the Quran. Allah says in the Quran, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ. He says to the Messenger of God, tell them, if you love God, then follow me. Same word is used, ittiba. Then follow me. Now, traditionally, we have the idea of fellowship in that sense, that you take a teacher and you take from the hal of the teacher, the state of the teacher, and the knowledge of the teacher. Unfortunately, states failed most of us, even as teachers, and so things have changed. However, the traditional understanding is that it's more than just turning up in a class and just like writing notes, that the practical element of that is the most important, having that relationship and following. And the reason I mentioned that is, take the sunnah as an example. The sunnah, people assume that the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is like a one-off thing, that it's the Prophet did it, so I'm going to do it one-off and it's fine. There's so much misinterpretation of the sunnah in that regard. For instance, how the Prophet ﷺ treated his wives, how he was at home with them, how he patched his own clothes, etc. All these things. This was a constant state of the Messenger of God. For us, we'll do something once and we'll say, "Oh, we fulfilled the sunnah." You haven't fulfilled the sunnah at all. The sunnah is something consistent. And it's a misunderstanding of the sunnah to think that I can just do it once and that's okay. It's not. It was a part of the life of the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam. And it's in following him that's important, that we continue that. One of the great scholars wrote a book on seeing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that the central principle to see the Prophet in your dreams is al-ittiba bi-sunnah, to follow the Messenger of God in that way, alayhi salatu wasalam. Number two, he sought permission to establish his followership, discipleship, saying, "Will you permit me to make myself your follower?" And this shows humility of the highest order. The next point Razi mentions is, by saying that you might teach me, he implicitly, positively attributed lack of knowledge to himself and knowledge to the teacher, although he has more knowledge than al-Khadir. But even then, he was humble in that regard. My people would come to visit my teacher and they would they would want to study, and they'll say, "What have you studied?" And then they would bring the list. I've studied this book and this book, and you don't do that with a man like that. So then obviously he's going to ask questions, and most of them would fail at that. So be careful of what they say. They say that if you sit with the people of the dunya, be aware, be cognizant, be aware of how you sit, because people judge you by your kind of your manners. People of the dunya, if you go to somebody's house, or you know, you sit properly, and because that will infer if you're a lazy person, a slack person. If you sit with the scholars, they say be careful what you say, because they'll judge you immediately. They pick up on it, on what you say, the claims you make, etc. They say if you sit with the people of God, be careful of what you think inside, what's inside. Control your heart, essentially. And they say when you sit with the arifin, kind of the high station of people of God, they say it doesn't matter, because they already know most likely what you're like. The last point, he said, teach me some of your knowledge. Now this is interesting. He said min. So in the verses, قال له موسى هل أتبعك على أن تعلمني مما. He didn't say teach me what you know, teach me everything. He said no, teach me just a portion of that which I need. So he knows exactly what he's wants to take from Musa alayhi salam. Now let's move on to the next verse. قال إنك لن تستطيع معي الصبر. I missed one particular point that I wanted to mention. Here we go. Earlier in the verse just before, Allah says in the Quran, فَوَجَدَ عَبْدًا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا آتَيْنَاهُ رَحْمَةً مِنْ عِنْدِنَا وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِنْ لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا. There's 2 points that I want to mention here. Number one, God says they found Musa and Yusha bin Nun عَبْدًا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا. Now when God uses the word abd in the Quran, it's a high status that God is giving to that person, high status. Now ubudiyah, being a worshipper of God, they say that ubudiyah has the high station, and I'll explain why. Nabuwa, prophethood, is the prophet's relationship with mankind. That's prophethood. Nabi comes from the word naba'a, to inform, akhbara. So the Nabi alayhi salam will take knowledge from God, revelation, al-wahi, and then he would explain it to the people. So he is a Nabi for the people. But abd is the relationship between that prophet or that a person and God. So that relationship, that the idea of ubudiyah, being a servant of God, has the high station of ubudiyah. So when God allots this word to somebody specifically, it's giving a very high station to that person. The next point, آتَيْنَاهُ رَحْمَةً مِنْ عِنْدِنَا وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِنْ لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا. There are 2 points and they're connected. Number one, God gives him ilmul ladunni. And al-Qushayri mentions what ilmul ladunni may mean. Now ilmul ladunni, he says, could be knowledge that is very, very special, that it can only be received directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through ilham. Through inspiration. It's a very specific form of knowledge. Again, be very, very careful, because a lot of charlatans out there that claim ilm laduni. There was a man in Birmingham, I'm not going to mention, I think I know his name, but I'm not going to mention it, who was a normal man till about 50 or 60, and all of a sudden he became this spiritually enlightened adjective, or add noun if you want, person. And he claimed that he could go into a dimension where he can read the entire Quran in 60 seconds. Gone in 60 seconds. So when I heard this, I said, yes. Abdullah bin Umar said it took him 6 years to memorize Surah Al-Baqarah, because he would reflect over the verses. Here we have Sheikh Sahib, whoever he is, he's reading the entire Quran cover to cover, Alif Lam Mim, or Fatiha all the way to An-Nas, 60 seconds. Maybe, look, give him some credit. Maybe he said 2 minutes, but I'm sure it was a minute. And they say, no. Do you know the Sheikh, what he does is he zones out into a timeless place, and that's where he recites it. So when you hear stupid things like that, just ignore them. It's similar to the guy on TV where you phone in and he'll say, okay, where's the pain? Like I've got back pain because I was sitting on chairs for so long. That's why I keep shuffling. So I would have to put my hand on my lower back here or somewhere, and then he'll say, "Okay, fine." So he'll then and he'll read something, and I'll say, "Do you feel better?" And he'll say, "Yar, actually, it's that's just a placebo effect, or you put your hand on your head." Now, this is all rubbish, by the way. Like, don't believe people that do those types of things. This is I don't know what these scam these guys are playing, but be careful of that. And they claim ilmul ladunni, this kind of direct knowledge from God, but obviously Khadir was given it in the Quran. But another interesting point is God mentions two characteristics, not 2 points, not just ilm, but he mentions rahmah. And therefore, rahmah, mercy, is always intertwined with the concept of ilm, of knowledge. Why? Because you can only have hikmah, true wisdom, if you have rahmah, if you have mercy, because you will know where to apply your knowledge, especially considering that human beings have particular cases and things going on in their lives. And rahmah, being empathic, is very, very important. And how you apply certain rulings is very, very important. For instance, the Qadi, the judge in a court, has a lot of discretion, and he often changes his opinion based on. So I'll tell you a bizarre story about that. So it's a true story, but it's bizarre. And the bizarre story is that in the Mughal Empire, and some of Hamza and some others may have heard this from me before, there was a woman, and this woman had her husband had passed away. So it had been a couple of years, and she's with child now. She's expecting. So obviously her family drop her in it and take her to the Qadi. They say, look at her. They probably want to. It was in India, so in Mughal times, so obviously disgrace or whatever. And so the judge, generally speaking, is something very important, that in the Islamic court of law, if somebody is brought into court and gives self-testimony that they committed adultery, the judge should throw them out before they incriminate themselves. Like, just get out and make tawbah, like, don't incriminate yourself. Anyway, so she comes in, and he says, "All right, fine, you're here now. What happened? What's happened there?" I don't know if those were his words, but she said, "Well, yeah, I'm with child." And he said, "But your husband's dead." She said, "Yeah, technically speaking, he's dead, but it's his child." And the judge says, "How on earth is it his child?" He said, "Well, he comes from the unseen, from barzakh." Obviously, the judge is like, what on earth? So he says, "Look, go and he summons the ulama, and he says, "Look, we've got this issue. What is this mumkin? Is this possible?" Meaning, it's not possible, of course, we know that, but can she get away with it? That's the point here. So they said, look, number one, obviously, whatever the responsibility of the judge and the court is, by, if there's any ambiguity, is try to not give the punishment. That's the idea of a court, that we try not to hand the punishment out. So the objective of the judge is, not to give any punishment. They say, based on that, well, it's possible, like, hypothetically. So unbelievably, they let her off, they let her go. So because they realize that there's no societal harm or anything like that, and they let her go. But so I don't know if that's a case of rahmah. Maybe it is, because obviously she has a child, and the child would be without a mother, and all these types of things. So anyway, they let her go. So, but rahmah is important, and unfortunately, what we don't find in people now, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man la yarham la yurham," and this verse mentions rahmah. He who is not merciful will not be shown mercy. And that's based on the story of Sayyidina Umar, when he was in a room and playing with a child on his chest, one of his children playing on his stomach. And the tax collector comes in and he says to him, "Oh, yeah, Amir al-Mu'mineen, do you play with your children?" He said, "Of course I do." He said, "Do you not play with your children?" He says, "No, I have, I don't know how many, 9 children he had." He said, "When I walk into the room, there's just silence, like Judge Dredd. I am the law." So he says, "Really?" He says, "Fine." He said, "You're a tax collector." So he said, "You've been relieved of your duty." He said, "Why?" So the person that cannot have mercy for his own children, how will he have mercy for the ummah of the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu? So mercy is incredibly important, but mercy with the ilm is very important, and it comes from experience. That if people of knowledge do not have mercy, when people come to them with questions and difficult situations, then what is there left? There'll be no hikmah in the rulings that they give. There'll be no hikmah whatsoever. So, like now, currently with this spat between certain scholars about the vaccine, that is it halal or haram? It's completely halal, by the way. Those people say it's haram haven't done proper requisite research, I believe. And so anyway, stuff of that nature. So that was a point that I wanted to mention there about the type of knowledge that Khadir has and the idea of rahmah related to his ilm, related to his knowledge. Now, moving on, I want to get to the next verse, inshallah. We're okay for time because we started a bit late. So he now replies, قال إنك لن تستطيع معي الصبر. He said, you will not be able to bear patience with me. You just won't be able to do it. Now, how does he know that? And this is a very important question. Number one, as a general principle, students generally lack patience. They're just impatient, especially in this day and age. Definitely, they lack patience. Even myself as a student, at the beginning, I was quite impatient. I thought things I would kind of learn things quicker. I didn't know that things take a long time. There was just an assumption that I wanted to do things, I wanted them now. Then over time, you begin to realize that it's not a race anyway. It's not a rat race. It's not a race to who knows more. And so it's just take your time and do things properly. So the nature of a student is to be, now this verse, of course, is not talking about that. But if we take a general principle, from this, that patience is incredibly important. Imam al-Ghazali states, a student should be like soft land that absorbs every drop of rainfall and voluntarily submits to everything. You have an intruder. And there he goes. So, sabr in the Arabic language, it means something, sabru al-mur, is something sour. So the point here is that a lesson to take is when one is seeking knowledge, it will take a long time. And also when one is trying to reform themselves, that will take a long time as well. That it's not if results are not seen immediately, that's perfectly normal. Khadir was aware that the Prophet Musa alayhi is governed by law revealed to him, and he will see al-Khadir doing things that conflict with the Sharia. Now, this is a possible answer. That why would Khadir say to Musa alayhi that you will not be able to bear patience with me? Why would he even say that? Now, my understanding of this is the fact that, and Kushairi alludes to this as well, and others have alluded to this as well, that the Sharia of Moses, Musa alayhi is not necessarily the same Sharia that governs al-Khadir. Because remember, at that particular time, the law that a prophet had was regional. It wasn't, could say, international in that sense. So it's very possible that Musa al-Khadir, as law was afforded certain things, or that he was divinely inspired in a certain way that Musa alayhi's law required to take to task immediately. So that conflict of law resulted, I believe, in this idea of قَالَ إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِيَ الصَّبْرَ. He said, you will not be able to bear patience with me, because when Musa alayhi sees certain things according to what's been revealed to him, that's not what you're supposed to do. That so because al-Khadir is such an exception, that will conflict with his understanding of law. Now, another point that I want to mention is, which al-Kushairi talks about, is about sabr and the idea of understanding. So, and I want to touch on this a little bit, is when you're studying, if you're studying with a teacher, whatever you may be studying, and you may feel that, okay, even if it's basic stuff that, it takes me a long time to understand this, God opens up for people understanding at different moments in their lives, for instance. That's why there's certain du'as to read, Allahumma aftah alayna fathan qariban, and all these du'as that you read. And you may get an opening in knowledge a bit later than somebody else. Somebody else may receive it before you, and therefore patience is important. Then he says, وَكَيْفَ تَصْبِرُ عَلَى مَا لَمْ تُحِطْ بِهِ خُبْرًا. And he explains what he meant. He says, how could you be patient about something that you have never encompassed in your knowledge? This is very, very important. That, i.e., that what I'm going to do and the things you're going to see, you've never even come across them. So therefore, it's going to be difficult for you to bear patience with them. The adab of a teacher is to point out the pitfalls and dangers before they occur, so as to be ready and forearmed against them. Thus, the sheikhs explain that the greatest danger on the path is the question, why? And this question is bound to arise along the way, even for one as knowledgeable as the Prophet Musa alayhi salam. He's going to ask the question, why did you do that? We'll see later in the verses. Because of the very nature of knowledge taught by them is outside the normal paradigm. This is where submission and patience become paramount. Now, I want to add a theological point here of tadbir, that when it comes to tadbir is how God administrates his affairs in the world, that it's often beyond the hudud al-aql, beyond our understanding. So we should not delve too much into them, that why did this happen? Why didn't it happen that order? Only if I did this, therefore this would have happened. Why? Because we will never be able to understand why God does all that he does and why he allows all that he allows to do. The arrogance of a human being and the transgression of a human being is to question God. Allah says in the Quran, God questions mankind. God is not there to be questioned. La yus'al, Allah is not, you have no right to question God. Questioning is only for the abd. So that's something very important, that in your lives, a spiritual point here is that when things happen, the why question doesn't solve anything often. The fact that it's happened. You take the hikmah from it and you move on. And Sayyidina Ali said people are tested with trials just as gold is tested with fire. He says, قَالَ سَتَجِدُنِي إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ صَابِرًا وَلَا أَعْصِي لَكَ أَمْرًا. That he says, don't worry, he said, you'll find me to be patient, because obviously Musa a.s. knows his own spiritual state. He said, of course, patience is, look what I've been tested with by God. This won't be a problem for me. And I will not conflict, or I will not disobey anything that you say. So therefore, Al-Ghazali says, their hearts are like rivers flowing from the divine presence. It was his trust in Allah that guided him to this man, and the same trust would help him to keep silent, patient, and obey. Meaning he's trusted the journey all the way until this point. Why wouldn't he continue it? Clearly God wants him to learn something here. قَالَ فَإِنِ اتَّبَعْتَنِي. And he puts a condition down. All teachers generally do this anyway. Although this is, like I said, the nature of this relationship is different. Although Kushairi sees it as a teacher-student, others do not. Like Shaykh al-Akbar, قَالَ فَإِنِ اتَّبَعْتَنِي فَلَا تَسْأَلْنِي عَنْ شَيْءٍ حَتَّى أُحْدِثَ لَكَ مِنْهُ ذِكْرًا. And I'm going to, inshallah, explain this point and finish on this point before we take questions and stop here. And I think we'll move into next week, inshallah, for the last segment. I did I'll try to do it in two, but there's so many points left about love we haven't mentioned. We haven't mentioned a few other very important points about istiqamah. I haven't mentioned points about reflection, introspection, and these things yet. So here he says, okay, fine. If you follow me, then you're not to ask me any questions. And شيء حتى أحدث لك منه ذكرى, until I myself make mention of it to you. Now, one of the conditions of the spiritual path, especially, is that the seeker has no real knowledge of the spiritual path. Only the master does. So all that the seeker has essentially is his will and his desire and his want to take the spiritual path. When it comes to knowledge again, and I've had this as well, and those who may have taught me have had this, syllabi that are laid out, subjects that we recommend to people, that's possibly on the back of 20, 25 years of experience. The student is there to take that, to find that from a teacher, a good teacher, and to then not ask any questions. Now, Musa alayhi salam in this particular, when he's being addressed here, is being conditioned or bound to it. He says, فَنِئْتَ بَعْتَنِي فَلَا تَسْأَلْنِي. Here, this is nahi. This is a prohibitive. He says, you cannot ask me about anything. You are not allowed. So a student, when he takes the path of spirituality or knowledge of any type, if the teacher demands certain things from them, like being on time, like having lessons on particular days, like studying particular things, like not having another teacher. And this is quite important often as well. That if you study with one teacher, a teacher's demand may be that you're not allowed to study this subject with another teacher because it may lead to confusion. If you agree to that, that's seen as a solemn pact between the teacher and the student, and that one must fulfill that requirement. So inshallah, we're going to stop there because we've gone in for almost an hour now. And I'll read the next verse, and from this, inshallah, we'll continue because the three major signs and of the story. فانطلق حتى إذا ركب في السفينة خرقها قال أخرقتها لتغرق أهلها لقد جئت شيئا إمرا. So the first part of the story begins, and they go into this boat, and what he does, al-Khadir, he takes, some say he has a staff, others say he takes like a stick, and he breaks it makes a hole in the boat. He breaks a part of it, and then Musa alayhi salam says to him, قال أخرقتها لتغرق أهلها. Did you break it so you may drown the people in the boat? لقد جئت شيئا إمرا. What a bad thing you have done, or what certainly you have done something that's incorrect or wrong. And we're going to go into that. What did he do? Why did Musa ask the question? How that relates to what spiritual point can we derive from that in terms of the harshest of lessons. But I want to finish off just as a point. Bear something in mind for us as followers of the Messenger of God alayhi salatu wasalam. We have an ultimate judge criteria, and that criteria is Sharia. If any sheikh, ustad, or anybody else comes along and says or tells somebody to do something or does something himself that contravenes the law of God, Allah Jalla wa ala, because this is a very specific instance, you see, it's very specific, the story, contravenes that or breaks that law, then it's haram to follow them. Not only is it haram to follow them, it's a major sin, and one must leave them also, regardless of their supposed or their assumed state, the stories that people have told and the miracles that they apparently performed. If they are disconnected from the Sharia, the law that God has sent down, i.e. they don't pray, they have relationships, illicit relationships, they and things of that nature, and whatever else it may be, then there is nothing that will save them. Their spirituality is false. Imam Abu Harith al-Muhasibi states that the first thing obligatory upon the spiritual person, or a person on the spiritual path, is to fulfill the obligations of the ahkam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. If you cannot fulfill them, then you have no status with God. So inshallah, we'll stop here for today, and I'll take questions. So we've covered 2 or 3, maybe 4 themes of spiritual benefit today, and we'll continue for the last segment next week, inshallah. Hamza, just put them on here. I don't have my phone on me. So Ilm al-Dunya and how it's spelled in Arabic. So if you go to the verse, is Lam Dal Nunya. Ladun in Arabic means, if you say Lada in Arabic, it means from me. Ladayya, for instance, I have. In Muludunni, some say it refers to the idea that it's a specific special knowledge that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Kushairi has some interesting points on it, actually, which I didn't unravel today. I didn't think it was useful for everybody, but some say that it's knowledge outside of the general, it cannot be acquired except directly from God Almighty. It's something that God only gives to specific, distinct servants of His, and not to the general populace. How do people who have procrastination problems deal with it to start studying sacred knowledge? So procrastination, somebody who's mumatil, for instance, affects everybody, especially in this day and age, especially in lockdown. So procrastination, this is the era of procrastination, unfortunately. However, I would say that you need to find a good teacher, number one. If you find a good teacher that cares for you, that cares about you, then you would progress, definitely progress. So one of the problems that we tend to have is they have two problems. The first problem is, really sorry about that. The first problem is it's very difficult. Many teachers out there, all of us have this problem sometimes, so Allah forgive us. But teachers are not dedicated enough to their students, in that they'll start a course, they'll run it for 6 months, a year, then they'll stop that because they want to change. They'll start another course, then they'll stop that. They'll start another course. They can never sit in one place and really produce. That's the point where my teacher was very concerned about that with students. He said, wherever you do sit in one place, and if you're going to teach, sit and teach and produce and try your best to stick to it. That's one problem that we have too much kind of almost faffing about by teachers, and really badly developed courses. And teacher turns up, teacher doesn't turn up. So unfortunately, that's a bad habit, and so that's one problem. But then you have the problem from the student, because students are not serious. However, if you get a good teacher that pushes you, that looks after you, that is concerned about you, that's not just there to pick up a check and pick up his wages, but he's actually concerned in his mind all the time that these are my students, and he's concerned about every individual student and their needs, then that's a brilliant teacher. If you can find a teacher like that, it's not, I would say, they're out there. It's not impossible, but it's not the norm always. Sometimes teachers, they'll just teach the class and that's it. They won't really think about the class after, but teachers should think about all of the students. And dedicate yourself to that teacher, then you'll learn. Definitely 100% you'll learn. Otherwise, I think it'd be very difficult if you leave it to yourself. You need really good teachers that will push you, and you stay with for a long period of time. Don't, I think, to stay with the teacher for a short amount of time, you won't gain anything really. A little bit maybe, but stick with them for a long period of time, and just dedicate yourself to study. But a good teacher is important, and that's what I would say. Time management is a problem in lockdown. What do you recommend to us so we can gain a closer connection to God whilst maintaining work-life balance? We're all struggling, man, in lockdown. So we, since the first lockdown was not too, or this one, even with myself and me and my wife, we've got all our kids at home, all four of them, 4 children, alhamdulillah. My youngest is 3, and my eldest is 14. So, they're all schooling in the morning and, staying on top of other, work duties. Then there's house duties, then there's children duties. It's been very difficult. I have to say, it's been very difficult. However, I don't really know, to be honest with you. I don't know how to answer that question. So I don't know. Probably ask somebody that is in your line of work, that it manages their time. My line of work is very specific, you see. So the way I manage my time is probably a bit different to. I can't give a generic answer for that, and I have quite bad sleeping problems. So, but the way I do my work, do my hours, may be a little bit different to you. So, although I manage my time well, but generally, Dr. Jibril Haddad, I remember, he always said, sleep early and wake up early, but I don't always follow that. I sleep late quite often. But I do believe, though, that I wake up early. Waking up early is very important. Waking up early is very important. Allah give us tawfiq for that, because yours more barakah in the early hours, you get more done, stuff like that. But definitely have action plans and try to follow them through, and try to have deadlines and stuff, and try your best to follow that. But in terms of procrastination, that's a big problem, and that's about people's use of media often. They just cut your means off. If you, that's all you're doing is you're watching Netflix all the time, and you're playing games all the time, you're gaming, Netflix gaming between the two, then get rid of it. Really get rid of it. Give it to somebody else in your house and say, only allow me to use this for a certain amount of hours a day or in the week. Put yourself under those restrictions. If you can't control yourself, bring in somebody external to do that, because if that's the case, then that's a bad place to be in. So you need external help for that. And, type of zajr, almost like a kind of a real preventive. What advice would you give to somebody studying Arabic who is struggling with memorizing the different aspects of sarf? Ooh, not the monster that is sarf. Okay. This piece of advice, hopefully, this is, so I have, of course, I've been teaching Arabic for 2 decades now. And so I think I have a little bit of experience in this. So I would say this. Number one, if you're studying Arabic, do not stop. If you stop, you will fail. That's the first principle of Arabic. Studying Arabic, do not stop. As for sarf, it's difficult, but don't really overly obsess with memorizing to the T. What to do is keep with it. The more you stay in the sarf class, the longer you stay in it, the more verbs you go through. Over a long period of time, they will become easier for you. Okay, even if you don't memorize them all in one go at the beginning. So stay and keep repeating and just give yourself more time if you're struggling, but don't take breaks. If you take breaks, you'll forget everything you've done. I knew a guy who studied sarf for like 7 years because he would start and then stop and then start and then stop and then start and then stop. I don't know if he's still studying sarf. I hope he's not, but I hope he's progressed past it. So yeah. How does reciting Surah Al-Kahf Friday relate to the protection from Dajjal? There's several hadith on that. Should I read them to you? I have them here. So, here we go. The Prophet ﷺ said in hadith narrated Abu Darda that he who recites the last and the first 3 verses from Surah Al-Kahf will be protected from the evil of Dajjal. Al-Barra ibn Azib mentions, another hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, it mentions in the Mukhtar of al-Maqdisi, he who recites Surah Al-Kahf on the day of Jum'ah will be protected from every fitna. So if Dajjal appears, he will be safe from him and the tribulation he brings. I think the hadith may have some weakness, but for Dar al-Amal, there's nothing, you can use it. And there are several other hadith as well. Some of the ulama mentioned the whole of Surah Al-Kahf is to be read on a Friday. Some say the first 10 verses are protection from Dajjal. Some say the last 10 verses are. So some of the ulama say the first 10, the last 10. Some say it's the first 3 and the last 3. But generally speaking, there's what I think that's useful is, look, not everybody may be able to read Surah Al-Kahf on a Friday. So if you can't read it on a Friday, there is great reward, according to some ulama, more reward in listening to the Book of Allah than even reading it, according to some positive opinions. So therefore, if you're going to Jumu'ah, why don't you take a journey to a Jumu'ah that's a little further away, put it on in your car. Surah Al-Kahf, you can get a Qari that recites it in about 18 minutes, 17, 18 minutes. By the time you get there, you've listened to the whole surah. So, I myself lead the Jumu'ah every single week in Solihull, and every week I put it on, and by the time I get to Solihull, it finishes. The whole surah, I listen to it by the time I'm there, because I have that period of time, you see, and it's Friday, and the barakah of listening to Surah Al-Kahf. And not only that, you'll probably end up memorizing the whole surah. Many people, just by listening over and over again every week, you'll memorize it, So that's something maybe benefit. Same question for Nahu as-Sarf. Yeah, leave me alone. All these Nahu Sarf questions now. Same thing, like I said, as long as you've got good teachers and they stick to the course and they're willing to help you, just stay with it, inshallah. Don't be disheartened or disillusioned at the beginning of your journey, because the first 6 months of studying Arabic are the most difficult. After that, it's even more, no, it's not. Inshallah, after that, it'll become more fruitful. But it takes time. You have to get over the difficult part to receive kind of the bliss and the fruits of your labor, I would say, probably. What is the significance of the middle word of the Quran? It is found in Surah Al-Kahf, highlighted in bold in the Saudi. I'll have to see that. I'm not sure. That is. You mentioned the ahkam of God that are to be fulfilled in the Quran. Can you mention a few? I'm just obligations, fara'id. Akim as-salah, fasting, praying, the nawahi of Allah, not drinking alcohol, committing zina. Allah says, Allah doesn't say don't commit zina. He says, la taqrabu zina. Allah says, and this is something really important, that Allah says, doesn't say do not commit zina. He says, don't even go near it. It's a fahisha. It will completely spiritually destroy you. It's an immoral act in that sense. It's a fahisha. And Allah says, wasa'at sabila. Very importantly, God says about zina, don't near it, because it's wasa'at sabil. It's a worst path you can take. Why? You'll be emotionally destroyed. If it's adultery, even worse, you're destroying 2 lives, possibly 3 lives. So, These are nawahi in the Quran. There's no mincing our words on them. It's just, God hasn't made this religion difficult for us. The religion has yusr in it, that we make, our nafs and our ego makes excuses, but really God has made very few things haram. Many things are haram. And so the fact that God created us, isn't he deserving that we at least stick to his limits for our own benefit, because God doesn't benefit from our amal, from our actions anyway. Yeah. Yatalattaf. I'll have a look, inshallah. I'm not sure. It's not coming to my mind anyway. I'll have a look for next week. Hamza, remind me of that in the week or something. Yeah, but it's not. Allah alam. Allah knows best. Any other questions? Hamza, is there anything else? Are we good? Okay, now also I would like from especially our regular viewers, if you could possibly, even under this video, below this video, or on the Instagram post, or on the Facebook post, can you please start sending in topics that you would like me to cover, that you feel are important for the discourses, that are of general benefit to everybody and general interest to everybody. So then I'm just not delivering discourses that I feel that are useful, or that everybody else feels that should be talked about, issues that should be discussed, inshallah. So if you could do that, either on this video, on our or our Deen Central email as well. Lockdown, fatigue, and guilt. Oh, you'll have to unpack that for me. Like, what? If you can unpack that, inshallah, I don't mind doing something like that. But lockdown, fatigue, and guilt. Which part is the guilt and which part is the fatigue? So I don't know what title. I couldn't put that as a title, definitely. But yeah, if you could unpack that title for me, inshallah, I can probably prepare something for it. Yeah. Somebody did, Hamza did request that. Yeah, please follow us on social media. So we've got the Deen Central social media, and also Sacred Text. Sacred Text is my co-founder of the organization. It's for academics, the academic institute, and the community institute that I work for is Deen Central, where we try to deliver things on the ground. So please follow them both, yeah, and you get updates. Guilt should be doing more. Okay, I got you. Fatigue, missing the Prophet's Prophet of Mercy gathering. Yeah, I mean, yesterday we had a private class yesterday we were in, and I did mention that things of that nature, that physically people have affected people greatly. And also I want to mention this very quickly. I did plan to mention this, so I'll do it now. Please, everybody, be careful and adhere to the rules. Wallahi, we have lost so many people in the last few weeks. A very dear friend of mine, an entire family actually, very dear to me, have lost both of their parents, mother and father, in the 24 hours, and two sons, two people that I know very well, are both struggling in hospital at the moment. So this is real. Stop spreading pseudoscience, false bloody videos about scamdemic and about the fact that viruses cannot be passed on except through directly being injected into the blood. Stop spreading the pseudoscience, and these YouTubers who have no qualifications about these types of issues. And all these, I saw this video of this guy who's outside a vaccination clinic talking about how the masjid involved in this vaccination clinic, and don't they know this? Well, this is Jahl Murakkab. Who gives you any authority? Are you a specialist in immunization? Do you know anything about this field? I mean, the idea that you have no qualification in this field, yet you've gone on the internet and watched a video for 2 minutes, and you think you have the right to go out there and try to stop this kind of idea of immunization and masjids being involved. You should be ashamed of yourself. You have no right to do that. Unless you're an expert, just keep your mouth closed. Unless you have that level of, we complain all the time that people are talking about Islam and they have no knowledge. But what about medicine? Medicine is, I'm not qualified in medicine. I don't make those types of claims. Because I've watched a 2-minute video online, or I follow that what's that nutbag called online, Ike, whatever his name is, so who believes the Queen is reptilian. Or please stop it. People, and many people, somebody asked me a question, and they don't know that many people have died. Well, take it from me, I know many people, way over 100, that have died. Okay, young people as well amongst them. This is not a scam. It's not a people up. Yeah, it's a given that like not 1 in 5 people are dying, alhamdulillah, but many people have passed away, and many healthy people have passed away. It's very infectious. It's very easy to catch, and when you have it, it will debilitate you at the very least for a good period of time, if not send you into hospital, if not kill you. So of course Allah gives death and Allah gives life, nobody denies that, but stop spreading false information on the internet. And if you haven't got qualification, just keep your mouth shut. I mean, really, it's not for you. Al-jahlu qabl al-mawti mawtun fal-quburu qabl al-quburi. What does the Shaykh say? He said, Al-jahlu qabl al-mawti mawtun, ignorance before death is death itself. Fal-adsadu qabl al-quburi qubur. Bodies are like graves even before they're placed in graves. It's not your place. So please stop spreading dangerous pseudoscience, on your WhatsApp messages. If you're not an expert in the field, just stay quiet. If you don't want to take it, if you don't want to take the vaccine, fine. If you want to go out there and believe that the virus is not contagious and it's not going to do anything to anybody, then you should be ashamed of yourself. Follow the rules. And those people who say, oh, the lockdown didn't work anyway, well, it did in New Zealand. They have 0 cases. So, and this idea that some people have come together, colluded all over the world just to kill certain people is preposterous. That people are not out there, sincere people giving day and night trying to, one, help people who are unwell. I talked to somebody yesterday, a person quite close to me, who's a consultant in QE, and she told me that QE is running out of oxygen at the moment because there are that many people in the intensive care unit. They're running out of oxygen. So this is not a false flag, so be very, very careful. Until you lose one of your parents, you won't know really, or one of your close family members, and something very important in that. So please just be cognizant and careful of these things and stay safe. And if you're unwell or family members unwell, we pray that Allah Jalla wa Ala give them a speedy recovery. And if you've lost somebody, that we pray that Allah give you patience, sabr, in this difficult time. And if you're struggling in the lockdown, that Allah give you a fath, an opening, and that Allah remove this situation from us as quick as possible. So stop spreading it if you are, or you're involved, or if you haven't, just make tawbah, inshallah. I'll finish there. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر لي ولكم وأتوب إليه ورسائل المسلمين.